But you mentioned, this was right before Meadows passed, and obviously you and John were pretty close. But I mean, I could just rattle off probably 10 people just in the last couple of years. I mean, Rich Piana and Dallas McCarver were the first two that I saw, that I think obviously people dying all the time, but those are ones in the social media scene that I saw. I was like, that had a big impact. And then there was Meadows, Cedric McMillan. I think George Peterson, he passed, right? George Peterson passed. Sean Roden. And then recently Joe Lindner, probably one of the youngest ones we've seen outside of Dallas McCarver. Boston Lloyd was like 29. And then I just posted my story, Gustavo Bedell, who you're probably more familiar with than a lot of the listeners. I actually saw, we could probably talk about this too, that I think it was 2005 during like peak Ronnie Coleman time, he beat Ronnie when they had the challenge round of the Olympia, which they don't do anymore. I guess the way that was, and you know this better than I would, that they would take poses and you could try to challenge another person with a certain pose, and so I guess when you added up all the poses, he actually beat Ronnie Coleman. I don't know if you're familiar with that specific year.
I remember watching it. I think I watched it live. I can't remember. I went to so many Olympics. I can't remember if I think I watched it once just online. But if I remember correctly, they had like the top six. I think it was just the top six, and I don't even know how they factored into the judging. But they went down the line. They allowed each of those. It was kind of like a challenge round. They allowed each of those top group to call out someone else and then pick the pose. Right. I remember there's actually a funny scene, speaking of Marcus Rule, there's a funny scene where Marcus, and maybe they pulled the two people together, right, and didn't have a choice, and Marcus goes out there and and then Ronnie gets chosen, and Marcus is like, oh man, how am I going to beat this guy? There's no way. But Gustavo, and then the judges would vote on that particular pose who won. I can't remember which pose that Gustavo beat Ronnie on. But he used to do like his side chest in a certain way with kind of his fists together like this, and it looked awesome. It looked really, really good. It may have been that because Ronnie's side chest, he kind of like had his shoulder would kind of like crunch forward. He didn't really.
He beat him in a side tricep. I know that.
Okay, that was it. Yes, I don't remember.
But like I didn't actually even really heard about the challenge round until I saw that Gustavo pass. I mean, he was 50, which is not young. I mean, it's young to die, I would say. It's not young like compared to like some of these guys, but and I don't know if that's obviously in bodybuilding, a lot of these professionals have there's other stuff going on a lot of times, right? There's other like chronic drug use and painkillers and lifestyle choices that maybe aren't ideal. But I'm just wondering if you have thoughts on, obviously Joe Lindner was like a big one. I don't think you knew him personally or anything, but more just that the general state of, it seems like maybe this is just because of social media getting bigger, but there's more and more of these stories that are happening. Leo and longevity was another one I forgot about that got passed.
Right.
But it could just be that it's more just being made of, now.
Yeah. And the thing, and then of course we got the possibility of blood clots secondary to being vaccinated. COVID that's out there is like this totally kind of unknown factor. I'm not even sure how much I trust the science. I watch retraction, or I get the daily newsletter from retractionwatch.org. I think you'd appreciate it too. The number of retracted studies and plagiarism and just craziness that goes on in academia. They at one point had tallied like over 150 particular studies related to COVID in particular that have been retracted. And that was like a year ago. It's probably up over 200 by now.
Wow. How are they determining, is somebody looking into it and saying like, oh, this was actually wrong and retracting it? Is it the original people who retracted it?
All sorts of dastardly stuff. So sometimes the data don't make sense. There's actually people that are sort of plagiarism hunters.
Okay.
And they can find this. So there's situations where things like, there's so many different things. Like there's a professor who plagiarized his or her graduate student's work and published it without naming the graduate student.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, there's one blood flow restriction related article that was published sort of as an extended letter to the editor with included data. That I remember this one because it was kind of in the exercise physiology realm, and there was a second author on this letter. And someone who knew that second author personally, another scientist, said, "Hey, did you write this? Like, this doesn't seem like something you would have put together. And the guy's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. What do you mean? The person
Wow.
who submitted it just completely came up with the whole thing, and it added someone's name who has credibility to get
Wow.
it published. Um, there are like sometimes Nobel Prize winners that literally they've got 5 or 6 papers to get retracted, part of a series, because they don't have the data, they can't reproduce the data. I mean, it's just like, it's really kind of scary. It's
Oh
extraordinarily
yeah.
scary. Um, a lot of sometimes political people who were scientists in the past. I mean, we're talking about people. Sometimes someone figures out that they falsified the data that led to them earning their PhD. The
Wow.
PhD gets retracted. So it's,
Really?
oh yeah, it's dog eat dog. Like, is it? I get it. There's 3 or 4 stories every single day.
Yeah.
There's a
Jeez.
weekend reads. I could click on it now if we had more time, but so anyway, but back to what you said, like if you listen, like from what I understand, Joe Lindner, there was, I think the going theory, and I'm not trying to create like, gossip, but that he had an aneurysm. He had, I believe, a relative that had an aneurysm.
Yeah, I think his mom had an aneurysm, and then his
Yeah,
girlfriend posted he had an aneurysm. She posted that almost right away, so I don't know if that was, if they qualified that with anything, but yeah.
and that's I've heard that an autopsy said that as well. Because
Okay.
they're talking about, obviously he was German, so they talk about a good bit. And you've got like Dallas McCarver. I mean, he was, loaded to the gills with everything possible. So
Yeah.
if there's some risk factors, they're going to be accentuated by drug use. Like he was someone that might happen to. And Rich Piana as well.
Hmm.
Lots of stuff involved there. John, on the other hand, having spoken to John was doing everything absolutely possible to preserve his health,
Yeah.
seeing doctors regularly. He had a video with his cardiologist.
Yep.
Um,
I remember.
and I don't know, I'm not going to speak to what the exact cause of death John was, but obviously John pushed the limits to some degree, as he spoke about openly in
Hmm.
videos, especially at the end. There's what he did, and et cetera, et cetera. But in those last 2 years, like especially after he had the heart attack,
Right.
John was doing everything possible. And we know he had a history of potentially a clotting issue, and he had that other issue behind when he had his colon taken out. So,
Right. Right. Was it
so
a
you've got,
second heart attack with John? Is that how he passed the second?
I don't know. I've never heard an autopsy report as to what
Oh,
actually,
okay.
that was, people had speculated. It's hard. It's even hard for me. Like, you can't, your memory will trick you. It's like you
Yeah.
hear
Yeah.
these rumors, like, I can't remember if that was a rumor, what everyone
Mm,
speculated, or if I came to that conclusion in the conversation.
right.
But I just know for sure, because John and I were going back and forth, and he's concerned about, you know, kidney values being a little bit off,
Right. Right. Right.
and that he doesn't want to train too hard, but he's doing really, really well. And that, like, his echocardiograms were getting better and better and better.
Mm,
He's like, how can this be? Um, so we got a range of situations where some people are just pushing the limits like crazy, and it kind of gets them while they're doing that. And then other people are being really, really safe. And then you've got just genetic happenstance,
sure.
maybe in the Joe Linder's case. Sean Roden, there's, stuff out there about him having had some issues in the weeks before that he was just sort of kind of blew off, like
Oh, really?
angina pectoris types of thing. That's what I've
Hmm.
heard. So, but we can't, I wish there was some way. It's almost impossible to glean out unbiased data to determine, to what extent these deaths can be attributed to PED use, because
Hmm.
these are all individual cases. I mean, just if we just think about the possibility of clotting disorders or clotting issues related to vaccination, if you're a social media influencer who's traveling all over the place, for instance, in Germany, they were requiring people to have been vaccinated just to like go to do anything.
Yeah.
I know friends of mine, coaches over there, who literally they didn't want to get vaccinated. They didn't trust, like, these vaccines hadn't gone through the normal testing that typically the 10-year process that typically would happen for a vaccine would be actually used as these they were on a sort of investigation or a temporary status. I forget how they term that with the FDA, at least over here. But Germans had no choice. Like, these
Yeah.
coaches, they want to go, they need to go support their athletes. They got to get vaccinated. So there are people who got vaccinated because they needed to travel across countries, multiple times, because of varying rules. Like, you want to go to the Middle East, you got to get vaccinated, even though, or with a different vaccine than the one you just got vaccinated. So you double up within 3 weeks on two of them, and like, who knows what's going on there,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So yeah, I wish I could say. I mean, we know obviously that most PEDs aren't going to improve your longevity or your life expectancy.
Sure.
There's no doubt about that. So
Yeah, and I look at like some people I think on the extreme end, like a Dave Palumbo. At least from I don't watch a lot of his stuff, but from what I've seen, he seems to always just go back to it was just genetics. It was just genetics, and obviously there's genetic. I mean, I talk about genetics all the time. There's a huge genetic
yeah,
component to many things, but to say things are just genetics, like I think he was even trying to say, oh, Boston Lloyd, he had X problem. It was just genetic, and it's like, man, this guy was doing everything under the sun, taking it to the extreme for a decade. You really think this guy was going to die at 29? If not for the gear, there was no influence there. And I don't know if he's specifically saying there was no influence, but when I look at all of the people we named, they were all heavy PED users. And I look at the natural bodybuilding scene. I can't think of a single person who, like in the last decade that I've known. I mean, obviously people die all the time, right? People die tragically of different things. But I can't think of any of these guys in the natural community who's like, wow, a person was 40 and they just died of, an MI or a PE or anything like that.